The first snow of the season was beginning to fall when Emma Carter finally collapsed beside the mountain highway, her medical bag clutched against her chest like armor. For 3 days, she had been walking through the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, following winding roads that seemed to lead nowhere, surviving on vending machine crackers and water from roadside streams. The nursing scrubs she wore were torn from brambles, stained with mud, and offered little protection against the October chill that promised a brutal winter ahead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months ago, Emma had been one of the most respected ICU nurses at Cedar Falls Hospital, known for her quick thinking during medical emergencies, and her refusal to cut corners when patient safety was at stake. Then she had discovered that Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief of surgery, was performing unnecessary operations on elderly patients to inflate insurance claims. When Emma reported the fraud to hospital administration, she learned that Dr. Webb was married to the hospital board chairman's daughter. Within a week, she found herself accused of stealing narcotics from the medication lockup, fired without references, and facing criminal charges that would destroy any chance of working in healthcare again. The irony was bitter. Emma had never taken so much as an aspirin from the hospital, but security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the alleged theft, and suddenly former colleagues refused to return her calls. Her small apartment lease was terminated early due to character concerns from the landlord, and her nursing license was suspended pending investigation. With nowhere to turn and no money for lawyers, Emma had made the desperate decision to disappear into the mountains, hoping to reach her aunt's old cabin near the Tennessee border. But the cabin, when she finally found it after 2 days of hiking, had been destroyed by a fire years earlier. Nothing remained but a stone chimney and the crushing realization that she had reached the end of her resources. As snowflakes began to dust her shoulders, Emma felt the kind of despair that comes when all options have been exhausted and winter is approaching with indifferent cruelty. The sound of an approaching vehicle made her look up from where she sat shivering beside the empty road. A battered pickup truck emerged through the swirling snow, moving slowly as if the driver was searching for something. When it stopped beside her, Emma tensed, ready to run despite her exhaustion. Too many people were looking for her now, and not all of them had good intentions. The man who stepped out of the truck was unlike anyone Emma had encountered during her years in sterile hospital corridors. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor and dark hair that needed cutting. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his clothes were practical rather than fashionable, worn flannel and denim that had been chosen for warmth and durability rather than appearance. But it was his eyes that caught Emma's attention, intelligent and assessing, as if he was accustomed to making quick decisions in difficult situations. "You look like someone who's had a rough few days," he said, his voice carrying a slight mountain accent that suggested local roots. "I'm Jake Mitchell. This is my land you're sitting on, but you're welcome to it. Question is, do you need help?" Emma studied his face, searching for signs of deception or threat. She had learned to read people quickly during her nursing career, watching for the subtle indicators that separated concerned family members from those who might become violent when bad news was delivered. Jake Mitchell's expression showed genuine concern without the predatory interest she had learned to fear from men who assumed a homeless woman had few choices. "I'm Emma," she said carefully, not offering her last name. "I was looking for my aunt's cabin, but it's gone. I think I might be lost." Jake nodded toward the swirling snow. "You're about 15 miles from the nearest town, and this storm's going to get worse before it gets better. I've got a place up the mountain where you can warm up, get some food. No obligations, just basic human decency." The offer was tempting, but Emma had learned caution the hard way. "Why would you help a stranger? You don't know anything about me." "Don't know much about you," Jake agreed. "But I can see you're carrying a medical bag, and your hands have the calluses that come from starting IVs and handling medical equipment. Either you're a nurse or you've gone to considerable trouble to impersonate one. Given that we haven't had proper medical care up here since old Doc Peterson retired last spring, I'm inclined to think you're exactly what this community needs." Emma's surprise must have shown on her face because Jake smiled for the first time, transforming his weathered features. "Small communities notice things. Ben Torres, my neighbor, throughout his back last week and has been suffering because the nearest hospital is 2 hours away. Maria Santos at the general store has been worried about her blood pressure but can't afford the trip to town for a checkup. You might be lost, Emma, but maybe you're lost in exactly the right place. The warmth of Jake's truck cab was overwhelming after 3 days of mountain cold, and Emma found herself fighting back tears of relief as feeling returned to her numb fingers. Jake drove with the confidence of someone who knew these winding mountain roads intimately, navigating switchbacks and steep grades that would have challenged most drivers even in good weather. The truck's heater worked overtime against the encroaching storm, and Emma began to thaw both physically and emotionally. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, partly to make conversation and partly to assess whether Jake was someone she could trust with the truth about her circumstances. "About 2 years now," Jake replied, his hands steady on the steering. Well, as they climbed toward a ridge barely visible through the snow. "Came up here to get away from the complications of modern life. Found out I was pretty good at living off the grid, and the community adopted me as their unofficial handyman and problem solver." Emma noticed the careful way he phrased his answer, revealing little about his background or motivations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She recognized the technique because she had been using it herself since leaving Cedar Falls. People running from something often develop the ability to share information without revealing anything meaningful. The truck turned onto what appeared to be a private road, though Emma could barely make out tire tracks through the accumulating snow. After another mile of careful driving, Jake's home came into view, and Emma felt her breath catch in surprise. She had expected a rough mountain cabin, the kind of primitive shelter that someone hiding from civilization might cobble together from salvaged materials. Instead, she saw a substantial log house that managed to look both rustic and sophisticated. Solar panels were mounted on the south-facing roof, partially covered with snow, but still clearly functional. A generator shed sat nearby, and Emma could see the gleam of what appeared to be a satellite dish partially concealed among the trees. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, promising warmth and comfort that felt almost too good to be true. "This is beautiful," Emma said as Jake parked the truck near a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the house. "Did you build this yourself?" "With help from neighbors," Jake said, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. Mountain communities work together on projects like this. Everyone contributes what they can, and everyone benefits when it's finished. Inside, the house was even more impressive than Emma had expected. The main room featured a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, with comfortable furniture arranged to take advantage of both the heat and the spectacular view through large windows. But what caught Emma's attention was the obvious quality of everything she saw. The furniture was well-made rather than improvised. The kitchen appliances were newer than what she had owned in her apartment, and the overall impression was of someone who had chosen this lifestyle rather than being forced into it by circumstances. Jake noticed her expression and seemed to understand her confusion. "I had some resources when I decided to make the move up here. Nothing fancy, just enough to do things right the first time instead of constantly repairing mistakes." He showed her to a guest room that was clean and comfortable, with a private bathroom that featured hot running water and towels that smelled of mountain air rather than institutional laundry. Emma set her medical bag on a wooden dresser and caught sight of herself in a mirror for the first time in days. The woman looking back at her appeared older than her 28 years, with hollow cheeks and eyes that held too much wariness for someone who had once believed that doing the right thing would be rewarded rather than punished. When she emerged from the bathroom after a hot shower that had washed away 3 days of mountain grime, Emma found Jake preparing dinner with the efficiency of someone accustomed to cooking for himself. The kitchen smelled of herbs and roasting vegetables, and she realized she hadn't eaten a proper meal since fleeing Cedar Falls. "I hope you don't mind vegetarian," Jake said, stirring something that smelled wonderful in a cast iron pot. "I keep some livestock, but I usually save meat for special occasions or when the weather gets really brutal." Emma accepted a bowl of what turned out to be a sophisticated vegetable stew that would have been welcome in any restaurant. The flavors were complex and satisfying, and she found herself eating with the appreciation of someone who had been surviving on vending machine food and whatever she could forage. "This is incredible," she said between spoonfuls. Where did you learn to cook like this? Jake's expression flickered with something that might have been discomfort. My mother insisted on a well-rounded education. Said a person never knew what skills they might need in life. Emma detected the careful phrasing again, the way Jake managed to answer questions without revealing anything specific about his background. She recognized the technique because she had been perfecting it herself over the past few months. People who were running from something often developed similar conversational patterns. After dinner, they sat by the fire while the storm intensified outside. Jake proved to be an intelligent conversationalist, equally comfortable discussing literature and practical subjects like solar power installation and water purification systems. Emma found herself relaxing for the first time in months, lulled by the warmth and the company of someone who seemed to expect nothing from her beyond polite conversation. Can I ask what brought you to these mountains? Jake said eventually, his voice gentle enough to make it clear that she could decline to answer if she chose. Emma stared into the fire, weighing her options. She could continue with vague responses and hope that Jake would let her stay until the storm passed. Or she could trust him with at least part of the truth and see whether he was the kind of person who might understand that good people sometimes found themselves in impossible situations. I was a nurse, she said finally. ICU at Cedar Falls Hospital. I reported some things that were happening there, things that were putting patients at risk. It turned out that speaking up was a mistake. The people involved had more power than I realized, and they made sure I paid for my interference. Jake's expression darkened. What kind of things? Unnecessary surgeries. A surgeon was performing operations that patients didn't need, inflating the bills to insurance companies. I tried to go through proper channels, but the surgeon was connected to people who run the hospital. Instead of investigating him, they decided I was the problem. Emma found herself telling Jake about the false accusations, the missing security footage, the swift destruction of her career and reputation. She spoke about the legal charges that would follow her anywhere she tried to work in healthcare, and the growing realization that speaking up for patients had made her unemployable in the profession she loved. Jake listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim as Emma described the systematic way her life had been dismantled. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire with the expression of someone wrestling with thoughts too complex for easy words. How long were you planning to stay up here? He asked finally. Emma managed a bitter laugh. I was hoping to reach my aunt's cabin and wait out the winter. Maybe figure out some way to clear my name, or at least find work somewhere far enough. A way that my reputation hadn't followed me. But the cabin's gone, and I'm running out of options. Jake turned to look at her directly, and Emma saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. It was the look of someone who had just made a decision that would change everything. The same expression she had seen on her own face in the hospital bathroom mirrored the morning she decided to report Dr. Webb's fraud. What if I told you there might be another option? Jake said carefully. Something that could solve your problems and help me with a situation of my own. Emma felt a familiar wariness creep into her chest. Men who offered solutions to desperate women usually expected something in return, and she had learned to be suspicious of bargains that seemed too good to be true. But something in Jake's tone suggested that whatever he was about to propose was more complex than simple exploitation. What kind of situation? She asked. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow that was now falling, heavily enough to erase all traces of the world beyond his property. When he turned back to Emma, his expression was serious but not predatory. I need a wife, he said simply. Not for romantic reasons, though I hope we could become friends. I need to satisfy the terms of a trust fund that requires me to be married by my 35th birthday. You need legal protection and a place to practice nursing without bureaucrats interfering. We could help each other. Emma stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. A marriage of convenience? That's your solution? A partnership. Jake corrected. You would have complete autonomy over a medical clinic I've been planning to establish up here. The community desperately needs healthcare services, and you have the skills to provide them. In exchange, our marriage would satisfy my family's requirements and give you legal standing that would make it much harder for your former employers to pursue their false charges. Emma's nursing training had taught her to think quickly in crisis situations, to evaluate options and make decisions under pressure. But this proposal was unlike anything she had encountered during medical emergencies. Jake was offering her a way out of an impossible situation, but the price was marriage to a man she had met 6 hours ago. "Why would you trust me with something like this?" she asked. "You know almost nothing about me." Jake returned to his seat by the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I know you're a nurse who lost everything because you tried to protect patients from fraud. I know you've been surviving in the mountains for days rather than compromising your principles. Most importantly, I know you're the kind of person who chooses to do what's right even when it costs you everything." Emma felt tears threaten again, not from despair this time, but from the unexpected kindness of being seen and valued by someone who understood that integrity sometimes came with a terrible price. She had begun to believe that her decision to report the hospital fraud had been a naive mistake, that she should have kept quiet and continued drawing her salary while patients suffered. Jake's words suggested a different interpretation, that perhaps she had made the only choice her conscience would allow. "What about your family?" Emma asked. "Won't they object to you marrying someone they've never met?" Jake's smile was grim. "My family has been trying to arrange my life since I was old enough to understand that their approval came with strings attached. They'll object to anything I do that demonstrates independence. At least this way, I'll be satisfying the legal requirements while maintaining control over my own choices." Emma looked around the comfortable room, thinking about the medical bag upstairs and the skills that were going unused while people like Ben Torres and Maria Santos suffered without proper health care. She thought about the legal charges waiting for her in Cedar Falls and the likelihood of spending the winter homeless in the mountains if she tried to continue running from her problems. "This clinic you mentioned," she said slowly. "I would have complete control over patient care decisions. Complete control. I'd handle the business side and provide funding, but medical decisions would be entirely yours. No administrators, no insurance company interference, no bureaucrats second-guessing your professional judgment." Emma closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would be like to practice nursing the way she had always believed it should be. Practiced, focused entirely on patient care rather than profit margins and administrative convenience. The idea was seductive enough to overcome her natural caution about accepting help from strangers. "If I agreed to this," she said, opening her eyes to find Jake watching her intently, "what would you expect from me personally? I mean, beyond the medical clinic." Jake's expression was steady and reassuring. "I'd expect friendship and mutual respect. I'd hope we could become partners in the truest sense, working together to build something worthwhile. But I wouldn't expect or demand anything romantic. That would have to develop naturally if it was going to happen at all." Emma felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of watching her nursing skills go unused while people who needed help went without care. Jake was offering her a chance to rebuild her life in a way that honored her values rather than compromising them. "You need safety. I need a wife," Jake said quietly, echoing his earlier words. "Maybe we can help each other find what we're really looking for." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Jake's house, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate hope that had sustained her during her flight through the mountains, but the steady hope that came from seeing a path forward that didn't require her to abandon everything she believed in. "All right," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Let's talk about the details of this partnership." Jake smiled, and Emma saw relief in his expression that suggested this arrangement was as important to him as it was to her. Whatever had driven him to seek isolation in these mountains, whatever family complications he was trying to resolve, he needed this marriage as much as she needed the safety and purpose it would provide. As they began to discuss the practical aspects of their proposed partnership, Emma felt the first stirring of curiosity about the man who had appeared in her life, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. Jake Mitchell was clearly more than he appeared to be, but then, again, so was she. Perhaps two people running from their pasts could find a way to build a future that was better than anything either of them had left behind. The marriage ceremony took place 3 days later in Maria Santos's general store, with Ben Torres serving as witness and the local justice of the peace conducting a brief civil service that focused more on legal requirements than romantic sentiment. Emma wore a simple blue dress that Maria had insisted on lending her, while Jake appeared in clean jeans and a button-down shirt that somehow managed to look both casual and formal. The whole affair lasted 15 minutes, But Emma found herself surprisingly moved by the moment when Jake slipped a plain gold band onto her finger and promised to honor their partnership. Within hours of signing the marriage certificate, Emma discovered that Jake's resources extended far beyond what his modest mountain lifestyle had suggested. A medical supply truck arrived at their property, delivering equipment that would have cost tens of thousands of dollars, everything from a digital X-ray machine to a fully stocked pharmacy cabinet. When Emma questioned him about the expense, Jake simply said that he had been planning to establish the clinic for months and had ordered supplies as soon as he decided the community needed proper health care. The clinic itself was housed in a converted barn that sat about 200 yards from Jake's main house. The building had been completely renovated with modern electrical systems, water lines, and heating that made it suitable for medical procedures. Emma walked through the spotless examination rooms, the small surgical suite, and the recovery area with growing amazement. This wasn't the makeshift frontier clinic she had expected, but a facility that would have met standards in any urban hospital. Emma's first patient was Ben Torres, who arrived the morning after the clinic opened with a back injury that had been troubling him for weeks. She examined him carefully, taking time to explain what she was doing and why, before prescribing a combination of physical therapy exercises and anti-inflammatory medication that had him moving more freely within days. Word spread quickly through the mountain community that the new Mrs. Mitchell was not only qualified but genuinely caring in a way that made people feel heard rather than rushed. Maria Santos came in next, worried about blood pressure readings she had been taking at home with a drugstore monitor. Emma discovered that Maria's medication had been improperly prescribed by a distant physician who had never met her in person, leading to side effects that were causing more problems than the original condition. After adjusting the dosage and teaching Maria how to monitor her symptoms properly, Emma saw the relief in the older woman's face when she realized she wouldn't need to make expensive trips to distant specialists. Within 2 weeks, Emma was treating everything from childhood ear infections to elderly patients with chronic conditions that had gone unmanaged for months. She found herself working 12-hour days and loving every minute of it, rediscovering the satisfaction that had drawn her to nursing in the first place. There were no insurance companies questioning her decisions, no administrators pressuring her to discharge patients prematurely, and no politicians deciding which medications would be approved based on cost rather than effectiveness. Jake proved to be an ideal partner in ways Emma hadn't anticipated. He handled all the administrative details that had made hospital work so frustrating, from insurance paperwork to supply ordering, leaving Emma free to focus entirely on patient care. He also showed an uncanny understanding of medical procedures and terminology that seemed unusual for someone who claimed to have learned everything from reading books and online research. Their personal relationship developed gradually, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than romantic attraction. They ate breakfast together each morning while discussing the day's schedule, and Emma often found Jake reading medical journals in the evening, asking intelligent questions about treatment protocols and pharmaceutical interactions. He was clearly well-educated, though he remained vague about his background whenever Emma tried to learn more about his life before coming to the mountains. The first hint that Jake's identity was more complex than he admitted came when a medical supply company called to discuss a large shipment that had been delayed. Emma answered the phone and was surprised when the caller asked to speak with Dr. Harrison about the order. When she explained that no Dr. Harrison lived at that address, the caller seemed confused and asked if this was the number for the Harrison Medical Group account. Emma mentioned the call to Jake over dinner, expecting him to be as puzzled as she was. Instead, she saw his expression tighten almost imperceptibly before he suggested that the supply company had probably confused their address with another customer. The explanation was reasonable, but Emma noticed that Jake seemed unusually distracted for the rest of the evening. The second incident occurred when a pharmaceutical representative arrived unannounced, looking for someone named Jacob Harrison who had apparently requested information about a new cardiac medication. The representative seemed genuinely surprised when Jake claimed there had been some mistake, checking his paperwork twice before apologizing and leaving. Emma watched Jake's face during the encounter and saw something that looked suspiciously like recognition, as if he knew exactly why the representative had come but was choosing to deny it. Emma's nursing training had taught her to notice patterns and investigate discrepancies that might affect patient care. She began paying closer attention to the details of Jake's behavior that had previously seemed merely quirky. The expensive medical equipment that had arrived so quickly suggested connections to suppliers that went beyond simple purchasing power. Jake's familiarity with medical terminology extended to subspecialties that even experienced nurses rarely encountered. Most tellingly, he seemed to know the names and reputations of physicians and researchers that Emma recognized from medical journals but had never met personally. The mystery deepened when Emma discovered a stack of medical journals in Jake's study, all addressed to Dr. Jacob Harrison at their mountain address. The journals weren't general publications that might interest an educated layperson, but highly specialized research periodicals that were typically read only by practicing physicians and academic researchers. When Emma confronted Jake about them, he claimed to have subscribed under a false name to protect his privacy, but his explanation felt rehearsed and unconvincing. Emma's suspicions crystallized into certainty when she found a prescription pad hidden in Jake's desk drawer while looking for a pen to sign supply invoices. The pad bore the name Jacob Mitchell Harrison, Maryland, along with a license number that would allow him to prescribe controlled substances. Emma stared at the evidence for several minutes, her mind racing through the implications of what she had discovered. Jake wasn't simply a wealthy man who had chosen to live in the mountains. He was Dr. Jacob Harrison, a licensed physician who was masquerading as a simple mountain dweller for reasons he had chosen not to share with his new wife. The realization explained everything from his medical knowledge to his ability to obtain expensive equipment, but it also raised troubling questions about why a qualified doctor would hire a nurse to provide services he could offer himself. That evening, Emma waited until after dinner to confront Jake with the prescription pad. She set it on the table between them and watched his face cycle through surprise, resignation, and something that might have been relief. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the deception settling between them like a physical barrier. Jake was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a secret for too long. "You want to know why I didn't tell you I'm a doctor?" Emma nodded, her anger tempered by genuine curiosity about the man she had married. "That would be a good place to start." Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had become his refuge. "My full name is Jacob Mitchell Harrison. 3 years ago, I was head of cardiac surgery at Charlotte Presbyterian Hospital and heir apparent to the Harrison Medical Group, one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the Southeast." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The Harrison Medical Group was notorious among healthcare workers for its aggressive cost-cutting measures and its practice of acquiring smaller hospitals only to strip them of resources and reduce services. If Jake was connected to that organization, her situation might be even more complicated than she had realized. 3 years ago, Jake continued, "I discovered that my family's company was systematically defrauding Medicare by submitting false billing for procedures that were never performed. Elderly patients were being charged for expensive surgeries while receiving only basic care, and the profits were being used to finance expansion into new markets." Emma's nursing background had exposed her to healthcare fraud, but the scale Jake was describing was beyond anything she had encountered. "What did you do?" Jake's smile was bitter. "I did exactly what you did. I reported the fraud to federal investigators, thinking that exposing the truth would force my family to change their business practices." Emma felt a shock of recognition. Jake's situation paralleled her own in ways that seemed too coincidental to be accidental. Both of them had discovered fraud in their workplaces, both had reported it to authorities, and both had suffered consequences for their ethical stance. "My mother, Dr. Patricia Harrison, is the CEO of the Harrison Medical Group," Jake continued. "She's also one of the most ruthless business executives in the healthcare industry. When she learned that I had provided evidence to federal investigators, she had me declared mentally incompetent and attempted to have me committed to a psychiatric facility." Emma gasped. The idea of using psychiatric commitment as a weapon against whistleblowers was something she had read about in medical ethics journals but had never encountered personally. "How did you escape?" "I had allies among the medical staff who helped me understand what was happening. I managed to leave the state before the commitment papers were finalized, but not before my mother had destroyed my reputation and made it impossible for me to practice medicine anywhere within her sphere of influence." Jake turned away from the window to face Emma directly. "The trust fund I mentioned requires me to be married, and settled by age 35, but it also includes provisions that would give my mother control over my inheritance if I'm deemed unfit to manage it myself. By establishing this clinic and marrying you, I'm demonstrating stability and responsibility that would be difficult for her to challenge in court. Emma struggled to process the complexity of what Jake was revealing. He wasn't simply a wealthy man seeking independence from family expectations. He was a physician in hiding, using their marriage as protection from a mother who had already tried to have him institutionalized for exposing her criminal activities. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Emma asked. "Why let me believe you were just someone with resources who wanted to help the community?" Jake's expression showed genuine pain. "Because I was afraid you'd think I was using you. My mother has tremendous resources and no scruples about destroying people who oppose her. By marrying me, you've potentially made yourself a target for someone who has already demonstrated her willingness to use psychiatric commitment against her own son." Emma felt the familiar surge of anger that came when powerful people used their positions to silence those who threatened their interests. She had experienced it when the hospital administration chose to protect Dr. Webb rather than investigate his fraud. Now she was learning that Jake had faced an even more systematic campaign of retaliation from his own family. "What about the federal investigation?" Emma asked. "Surely they would protect whistleblowers from retaliation." Jake's laugh was entirely without humor. "The Harrison Medical Group employs some of the most expensive lawyers in the country. They managed to discredit my testimony by claiming I was suffering from a psychiatric breakdown brought on by the stress of my surgical responsibilities. The fact that my mother had me declared incompetent helped support their narrative that I was an unreliable witness." Emma began to understand the full scope of what Jake had been facing. His mother hadn't simply tried to silence him, she had orchestrated a comprehensive campaign to destroy his credibility and make it impossible for him to continue his medical career. By retreating to the mountains and adopting a false identity, Jake had found a way to continue practicing medicine while staying beyond the reach of his family's influence. "So you've been hiding up here for 3 years," Emma said. "Why decide to establish a clinic now? Why risk exposure by advertising for a nurse?" Jake smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun. "Because I realized that hiding wasn't enough. These people need medical care, and I have the skills to provide it. I've been treating emergencies and basic cases for 2 years, but I knew the community needed someone with your nursing background to make the clinic truly effective." Emma thought about the patients she had treated over the past 2 weeks, the relief in their faces when they realized they could receive quality medical care without traveling hours to reach a hospital or clinic. "You could have told me the truth. I would have understood." "Would you have?" Jake challenged gently. "Or would you have worried that I was drawing you into a situation even more dangerous than what you were already facing?" Emma considered the question honestly. If Jake had revealed his true identity and the extent of his family's power during their first conversation, she might well have decided that association with him was too risky. The Harrison Medical Group's reputation for destroying opponents was well known among healthcare professionals. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. "But now that I know, what happens next? Do we continue pretending you're just Jake Mitchell, or do we find a way to use your medical training openly?" Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "That depends on whether you're willing to take on even greater risks. My mother won't ignore what we're doing here indefinitely. Eventually she'll learn about the clinic and recognize my involvement. When that happens, she'll try to destroy everything we've built, including you." Emma looked around the kitchen where they had shared meals and planned their days, thinking about the medical clinic that had already become the heart of the community's healthcare system. She thought about patients like Ben Torres and Maria Santos who had suffered for months without proper medical attention, and about the children she had treated for conditions that could have become serious without timely intervention. "I've already been destroyed once by people who put profit ahead of patient welfare," Emma said finally. "I survived that and found my way here. If your mother wants to try again, at least this time I'll know what I'm fighting for and I won't be fighting alone." Jake's smile was the first genuine expression of happiness Emma had seen from him since their wedding. "You're sure? Once we commit to this path, there won't be any going back to anonymity or safety?" Emma thought about the prescription pad that had revealed Jake's true identity, and about the medical degree he had earned through years of study and training that was now going unused out of fear of his family's retaliation. She thought about her own nursing license, suspended in North Carolina but still valid in other states, and about the satisfaction she felt when helping patients who had nowhere else to turn for care. "I didn't come to these mountains to hide forever," Emma said. "I came here to find a way to keep practicing nursing despite what happened to me in Cedar Falls. If using your medical training openly means we can provide better care for these patients, then that's what we should do." Jake reached across the table and took her hand, the simple gold wedding band catching the light from the kitchen lamp. "Then we're really partners now. Dr. Jacob Harrison and Nurse Emma Harrison, providing health care to people who need it regardless of what my family thinks about our choices." Emma squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that came from chopping wood and maintaining generators mixed with the steady fingers of a surgeon who had spent years performing delicate procedures. "What's our first step?" Jake's expression grew determined. "Tomorrow, I'm going to start seeing patients under my real name. We'll file the proper paperwork to establish me as the clinic's attending physician, with you as head nurse. And then we'll prepare for whatever response my family decides to make." As they sat together planning their future, Emma realized that her marriage of convenience had evolved into something much more significant. She and Jake weren't just partners in a business arrangement anymore. They were allies in a fight against a system that prioritized profit over patience and used power to silence those who dared to speak truth. Outside, the mountain wind carried the promise of winter storms ahead. But inside their kitchen, Emma felt the warmth that came from finally understanding that she wasn't alone in her struggle against corruption and retaliation. Jake had risked everything to expose fraud in his family's business, just as she had risked everything to protect patients from unnecessary surgery. Together they might be able to build something that neither of them could have achieved alone, a medical practice that served patients rather than shareholders, and a partnership based on shared values rather than convenience. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since leaving Cedar Falls, Emma felt ready to stop running and start fighting for what she believed in. The first sign of trouble came exactly 3 weeks after Jake began practicing under his real name. Emma was examining a young mother's newborn when she heard the distinctive sound of expensive vehicles climbing the mountain road toward their clinic. Through the examination room window, she could see a convoy of black SUVs moving with the purposeful efficiency of people accustomed to getting what they wanted through intimidation rather than negotiation. Emma finished the infant's checkup quickly and asked the mother to wait in the recovery room while she investigated the disturbance. She found Jake standing in the clinic's main entrance, his posture tense as he watched the vehicles arrange themselves in what appeared to be a coordinated formation designed to block all exits from the property. The woman who emerged from the lead SUV was immediately recognizable from her photographs in medical journals and business publications. Dr. Patricia Harrison stood barely 5 feet tall, but she radiated the kind of authority that came from decades of wielding power over life and death decisions. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and her dark suit was expensive enough to represent a month's salary for most of the people Jake had been treating. She was accompanied by what appeared to be a small army of assistants, lawyers, and security personnel, all moving with the coordinated precision of people who had conducted similar operations many times before. Emma counted at least 12 people emerging from the vehicles, far more than would be necessary for a simple family visit. Dr. Harrison's gaze swept across the clinic facility with obvious disdain before settling on Jake with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Jacob, you've been quite difficult to locate." Jake's response was carefully neutral, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. "Hello, Mother. I wasn't aware you were looking for me. Weren't you?" Dr. Harrison's smile was as cold as mountain wind. "You disappear for 3 years, establish an unauthorized medical practice and marry a woman of questionable reputation, and you think I wouldn't notice." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks at the casual dismissal, but she forced herself to remain quiet. She had learned during her hospital career that powerful people often tried to provoke emotional responses that could be used against their opponents later. Dr. Harrison gestured toward one of her assistants, who immediately produced a thick folder of documents. I have reports from private investigators detailing every aspect of your activities here. The illegal medical practice, the fraudulent marriage, the attempts to access family trust funds through deception. Shall I continue? Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. There's nothing illegal about practicing medicine with a valid license in a state that recognizes my credentials. The marriage is legitimate, and I'm not accessing any trust funds through deception. Aren't you, Doctor? Harrison opened the folder and withdrew several photographs that appeared to have been taken with telephoto lenses from considerable distances. The images showed Jake treating patients, Emma assisting with procedures, and both of them going about their daily routines with the assumption of privacy they had clearly been naive to expect. These photographs document extensive medical activities conducted without proper oversight or authorization from state medical boards. Dr. Harrison continued. They also show your wife practicing nursing with a suspended license, which constitutes a felony in most jurisdictions. Emma's blood ran cold. Her nursing license had been suspended in North Carolina, but she had assumed it remained valid in other states. If Dr. Harrison was correct about the legal implications, Emma could be facing criminal charges that would make her previous troubles seem minor by comparison. Furthermore, Dr. Harrison continued, clearly enjoying the effect her words were having. I have documentation proving that this entire facility was established using funds fraudulently obtained through identity theft and false representation to medical supply companies. Jake's face went pale. That's not true. I used my own resources to establish this clinic. Your own resources? Dr. Harrison's laugh was entirely without warmth. Jacob, you have no resources. You were declared mentally incompetent 3 years ago, which means any financial transactions conducted under your name are legally invalid. Every piece of equipment in this facility, every medication in your pharmacy, every supply you've purchased represents theft from the companies who believed they were dealing with a licensed physician in good standing. Emma felt the world shifting beneath her feet as she began to understand the true scope of the trap they had walked into. If Jake had been declared mentally incompetent, then their marriage might be invalid. The clinic might be operating without legal authority, and she might be facing charges not just for practicing with a suspended license but for participating in what amounted to an elaborate fraud. Of course, Dr. Harrison continued, her tone becoming almost conversational, these problems could be resolved quite easily. Jacob, if you voluntarily commit yourself to the psychiatric facility I've selected, I can ensure that the criminal charges against your wife are dropped, and that the medical supply companies are compensated for their losses. The offer was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who enjoyed watching people realize they had no good options. Emma understood now why Jake had been so reluctant to reveal his true identity. His mother hadn't simply tried to silence him 3 years ago. She had created a comprehensive legal framework that would allow her to destroy anyone who tried to help him continue his medical career. What guarantee do I have that you'll keep your word? Jake asked quietly. Dr. Harrison's smile broadened. You have my word as your mother and as a fellow physician who understands the importance of resolving medical emergencies with appropriate treatment. Emma recognized the carefully chosen language. Dr. Harrison was describing Jake's commitment to exposing healthcare fraud as a medical emergency requiring treatment, using therapeutic terminology to disguise what amounted to imprisonment for political dissent. And if I refuse, Jake asked, then I'll proceed with criminal prosecution against both of you. Your wife will face charges for practicing nursing without a valid license, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, and identity theft. You'll be charged with impersonating a physician, grand theft, and violating the terms of your mental health commitments. Dr. Harrison gestured toward her legal team. I have prosecutors in 3 states ready to file charges simultaneously. Even if you manage to avoid conviction on some counts, the legal costs will destroy you financially.
and the publicity will ensure that neither of you ever works in healthcare again. Emma watched Jake's face as he processed the impossible choice his mother was offering. Submit to psychiatric commitment, or watch both their careers and freedom destroyed through legal persecution that would be almost impossible to fight with their limited resources. There is, however, a third option. Dr. Harrison said, her tone becoming almost pleasant. Emma, was it? You could simply walk away from this situation entirely. Dr. Harrison gestured toward another assistant, who produced a briefcase and opened it to reveal neat stacks of cash. $200,000, enough to establish yourself anywhere in the country where your previous difficulties won't follow you. All you have to do is sign a document stating that this marriage was entered into under false pretenses and that you were unaware of Jacob's mental health status. The money represented more than Emma had ever seen in one place, enough to start over completely in a location where no one knew about her troubles in Cedar Falls or her brief marriage to Jake. It would mean abandoning the clinic and the patients who had come to depend on their services, but it would also mean freedom from legal prosecution and the chance to practice nursing again without looking over her shoulder. The document also includes a non-disclosure agreement. Dr. Harrison continued. You would be legally prohibited from discussing Jacob's condition or the circumstances of your separation, but you would be free to resume your nursing career without interference from my family or our legal representatives. Emma looked at Jake, seeing the pain in his expression as he realized his mother was offering her an escape route that would require her to betray everything they had built together. The clinic they had established, the patients they were treating, the partnership they had developed, based on shared commitment to ethical medical practice, all of it would disappear if Emma accepted Dr. Harrison's offer. What happens to the patients we've been treating? Emma asked quietly. Dr. Harrison's expression showed mild surprise, as if she hadn't expected Emma to be concerned about anything beyond her own welfare. The clinic will be closed, of course. The equipment will be returned to its rightful owners, and the patients will be referred to appropriate facilities for continued care. Emma knew what that meant. Patients like Ben Torres would go back to suffering without proper treatment because they couldn't afford the time or expense of traveling to distant hospitals. Maria Santos would return to managing her blood pressure with inadequate medication because no qualified physician would be available to adjust her prescriptions. Children with treatable conditions would go without care because their parents couldn't navigate the bureaucratic obstacles that made healthcare inaccessible to rural communities. I need to think about this, Emma said finally. Dr. Harrison's smile was indulgent. Of course, but don't take too long. I have legal deadlines to meet, and my patience for this situation is rapidly diminishing. She gestured toward her entourage, who began moving back toward their vehicles with the same coordinated efficiency they had displayed upon arrival. Jacob, you have until tomorrow evening to make your decision. Voluntary commitment or criminal prosecution for both of you. Emma, my offer remains open until the same deadline. As the convoy of black SUVs disappeared down the mountain road, Emma and Jake stood together in the silence that followed, both understanding that their brief period of building something meaningful together was about to end. The choice Dr. Harrison had presented them wasn't really a choice at all, but an ultimatum designed to force them into positions that would serve her interests while destroying theirs. Emma walked back into the clinic, looking at the examination rooms where she had treated patients with conditions ranging from minor injuries to serious chronic illnesses. The digital X-ray machine that had allowed her to diagnose a child's broken arm. The pharmaceutical supplies that had enabled her to treat Ben Torres's back pain effectively. The surgical equipment that had made it possible to perform minor procedures that would have required expensive hospital. All of it would disappear if Dr. Harrison carried out her threats. Jake found her in the main examination room an hour later, sitting quietly as she processed the magnitude of what they were facing. When he spoke, his voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting the same battle for 3 years without success. She's not bluffing about the legal charges. My mother has enough resources and political connections to make good on every threat she's made. Emma looked up at him, seeing the defeat in his posture that suggested he was already preparing to surrender. So you're going to accept commitment to the psychiatric facility. I don't see any other option that doesn't destroy you in the process. At least if I'm committed, you'll be free to take her money and start over somewhere else. Emma felt a surge of anger that had nothing to do with Jake and everything to do with a system that allowed people like Dr. Harrison to use mental health commitment as a weapon against political opponents. What kind of facility is she talking about? Jake's smile was bitter. The kind where patients who pose inconvenient problems for their families can be kept indefinitely, while doctors who are financially dependent on those families determine whether they're competent to make their own decisions. Emma's nursing background had exposed her to psychiatric facilities that genuinely helped patients recover from mental health crises. But she had also read about institutions that were little more than prisons for people whose families wanted them silenced. If Jake was committed to a facility controlled by his mother's influence, there was no guarantee he would ever be released. There has to be another option. What about the federal investigators you originally contacted? Wouldn't they be interested in Dr. Harrison's use of psychiatric commitment to silence whistleblowers? Jake shook his head. The federal investigation was closed 3 years ago when my testimony was discredited. They're not going to reopen it based on new claims from someone who's already been declared mentally incompetent. Emma walked to the window and looked out at the mountains that had become her refuge, thinking about the patients who would suffer if the clinic was closed and the precedent that would be set if Dr. Harrison succeeded in using psychiatric commitment to silence healthcare professionals who exposed fraud. What if we fought the competency ruling directly, challenged it in court with independent psychiatric evaluations that proved you're mentally competent to make your own decisions? Jake joined her at the window, his expression showing a flicker of the hope she had learned to recognize during their partnership. That would require lawyers, expert witnesses, and court costs that we can't afford. Even if we won, the process could take years, and my
Mother's legal team would appeal every decision until we ran out of resources to continue fighting. Emma thought about the $200,000 Dr. Harrison had offered her, money that could fund a legal challenge to Jake's competency ruling if it was used strategically, instead of simply taken as a bribe to disappear. The amount wasn't enough to match the resources Dr. Harrison could bring to bear, but it might be sufficient to establish Jake's competency convincingly enough to invalidate the criminal charges they were facing. What if I took your mother's money but used it to fund our legal defense instead of disappearing? Jake stared at her in surprise. That would violate the non-disclosure agreement. She could sue you for breach of contract and have you prosecuted for fraud. Only if she could prove I intended to violate the agreement when I signed it. If I genuinely intended to disappear but changed my mind after learning new information about your case, that might be legally defensible. Emma was thinking out loud now, drawing on her experience with medical ethics and legal procedures that governed healthcare decision-making. The key would be establishing your mental competency with independent evaluations before she could have you committed. If we could prove you're competent to make your own medical decisions, that would invalidate the basis for the criminal charges. Jake's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the implications of what Emma was suggesting. It would be incredibly risky. If the competency challenge failed, you'd lose the money and still face criminal prosecution. And if we don't try, you'll be committed indefinitely, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I chose money over fighting for what's right. Emma turned away from the window to face Jake directly. I've already lost one career for exposing healthcare fraud. I'm not going to lose another one by letting your mother use psychiatric commitment to silence ethical medical professionals. Jake's smile was the first genuine expression of hope Emma had seen from him since his mother's arrival. You're sure you want to take this risk? There won't be any going back once we commit to challenging her directly. Emma thought about the patients they had treated, the community that had welcomed her despite knowing nothing about her background, and the partnership she had discovered with someone who shared her commitment to putting patient care ahead of profit margins. I came to these mountains to escape from people who punish healthcare workers for doing the right thing.
I'm not going to let your mother succeed where the hospital administrators in Cedar Falls failed. As they began planning their legal strategy, Emma realized that her marriage of convenience had evolved into something much more significant than either of them had originally intended. They weren't just partners in a business arrangement anymore, or even allies in a fight against healthcare fraud. They had become two people who were willing to risk everything to protect each other and the principles they shared. The battle with Dr. Harrison would be the most difficult challenge either of them had faced. But for the first time since her mother's ultimatum, Emma felt ready to stop running from powerful people who used their influence to silence opposition. Together, she and Jake might be able to prove that courage and determination could overcome money and political connections, even when the odds seemed impossible to beat. The turning point came at dawn the next morning when Emma made a decision that would either save them both or destroy any chance they had of escaping Dr. Harrison's trap. Instead of waiting for Jake to wake, she drove down the mountain to Maria Santos's general store and used the satellite phone to make a call that would change everything. Dr. Amanda Chen was a forensic psychiatrist Emma had met during her hospital training, someone whose reputation for integrity was matched only by her willingness to challenge powerful institutions when patient welfare was at stake. More importantly, Dr. Chen specialized in evaluating competency determinations that had been made under questionable circumstances, often testifying in cases where psychiatric commitment had been used as a weapon against inconvenient family members. Emma Carter, Dr. Chen said when she answered the phone, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. I heard about your troubles in Cedar Falls. How are you holding up? Emma explained her situation quickly, describing Jake's background, his mother's threats, and the competency ruling that had been used to silence him for 3 years. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally asking pointed questions about the circumstances of Jake's original commitment proceedings and the evidence that had been used to support the competency determination. This sounds like a classic case of psychiatric commitment being weaponized to control someone whose actions threatened family financial interests, Dr. Chen said when Emma finished. I've seen similar patterns in cases involving inheritance disputes and corporate whistleblowing. The good news is that if your husband is genuinely competent, we should be able to prove it with proper evaluation procedures. Emma felt the first stirring of hope she had experienced since Dr. Harrison's ultimatum. What would that involve? Comprehensive psychiatric evaluation by independent experts, cognitive testing, assessment of his decision-making capacity, and review of the original commitment proceedings for procedural violations. Dr. Chen explained. The process typically takes 2 to 3 weeks, but I can expedite it if there's an imminent threat of recommitment. Emma explained Dr. Harrison's deadline, and Dr. Chen's voice hardened with the professional anger of someone who had spent years fighting against the misuse of psychiatric authority. 24 hours is completely inadequate for proper evaluation, which suggests your mother-in-law is more interested in coercion than legitimate mental health assessment. Dr. Chen paused, clearly thinking through the legal and professional implications of what Emma was describing. I can drive up to your location today with my evaluation team. If we can establish your husband's competency quickly enough, I can file an emergency petition to block any commitment proceedings until a full hearing can be conducted. Emma felt tears of relief threaten to overwhelm her composure. Dr. Chen, I can't afford to pay for this kind of evaluation. We don't have the resources to match what Dr. Harrison can bring to bear. Emma, you reported medical fraud at considerable personal cost because you believed patient safety was more important than your career security. I'm not going to let someone use psychiatric commitment to silence you or your husband for continuing that same ethical commitment. Dr. Chen's voice carried the determination of someone who had made similar sacrifices in her own career. Besides, cases like this need to be fought publicly. The misuse of psychiatric authority to silence healthcare whistleblowers is becoming an epidemic, and it needs to be exposed. When Emma returned to the clinic, she found Jake sitting at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the expression of someone who had spent the night wrestling with impossible choices. He looked up as she entered, and she saw resignation in his eyes that suggested he had decided to accept his mother's ultimatum. I called Dr. Amanda Chen, Emma said before Jake could speak. She's a forensic psychiatrist who specializes in evaluating questionable competency determinations. She's driving up here today with her evaluation team. Jake's expression shifted from resignation to something that might have been hope. Emma, even if she proves I'm competent, that doesn't resolve the criminal charges my mother is threatening. We still don't have resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. Emma sat down across from him and explained the plan she had been developing since her conversation with Dr. Chen. What if we turned your mother's ultimatum into a public fight about the misuse of psychiatric commitment against healthcare whistleblowers? Dr. Chen thinks this case could set an important precedent if we're willing to make it public. Jake's eyes widened as he understood what Emma was suggesting. You want to go public with the story? That would mean exposing everything, the original fraud investigation, my mother's retaliation, the competency ruling. All of it. Your mother's power comes from being able to operate behind closed doors, using legal and psychiatric systems that most people don't understand. Emma said, what if we forced her to justify her actions in front of medical professionals and journalists who understand exactly what she's been doing? Emma pulled out her phone and showed Jake the research she had been conducting since dawn. There are at least 6 other cases in the past 5 years where healthcare whistleblowers have faced psychiatric commitment or competency challenges after exposing fraud in their institutions. Dr. Chen thinks there's enough pattern evidence to suggest systematic misuse of psychiatric authority. Jake studied the information Emma had gathered, his expression growing more thoughtful as he recognized names and institutions from his own professional experience. These cases all involve large healthcare conglomerates with significant political influence. If we challenge the system publicly, we won't just be fighting my mother. We'll be taking on an entire network of institutions that profit from silencing opposition. Then maybe it's time someone took on that network, Emma said quietly. You've been hiding in these mountains for 3 years because you were afraid of what your mother might do. I've been running from false charges for months because I was afraid of what the hospital administrators might do. How many other healthcare professionals are staying quiet about fraud and patient safety violations because they're afraid of retaliation? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the mountains that had been his refuge. When he spoke, his voice carried a strength Emma hadn't heard since before his mother's arrival. If we do this, there's no going back to anonymity or safety. We'll be public figures in a fight that could last years and destroy us financially, even if we win. Emma thought about the patients they had been treating, the rural community that would lose access to medical care if the clinic was closed, and the precedent that would be set if Dr. Harrison succeeded in using psychiatric commitment to silence ethical healthcare professionals. I'd rather be destroyed fighting for something important than saved by giving up everything I believe in, Emma said. Besides, if we don't fight this, who will? How many other healthcare workers will face the same choice between ethical practice and personal safety? When Dr. Chen arrived that afternoon with her evaluation team, Emma watched Jake submit to the most comprehensive psychiatric assessment she had ever witnessed. The process included cognitive testing, personality evaluations, assessment of his decision-making capacity, review of his medical knowledge and professional competency, and detailed examination of the circumstances surrounding his original commitment proceedings. Dr. Chen's team worked with the efficiency of professionals who had conducted similar evaluations many times. But Emma could see their growing amazement as they discovered the extent of Jake's medical knowledge and the complete absence of any symptoms that would justify a competency determination. Mrs. Harrison, Dr. Chen said when the evaluation was complete, your husband shows absolutely no evidence of mental illness or cognitive impairment. His medical knowledge is extensive and current. His decision-making processes are rational and well-informed, and his commitment to ethical practice is consistent with the highest standards of medical professionalism. Dr. Chen's expression grew grim as she continued. However, the original competency proceedings were conducted without proper safeguards. His legal representation was inadequate, and the psychiatric evaluation that justified the ruling appears to have been conducted by physicians with financial relationships to your mother-in-law's medical group. Emma felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger at the systematic way Jake's rights had been violated. What are our legal options? I'm filing an emergency petition to block any commitment proceedings pending a full hearing on the validity of the original competency ruling. Dr. Chen explained. I'm also contacting the state medical board about potential ethical violations by the physicians who participated in the original evaluation. Dr. Chen paused and looked directly at both Emma and Jake. But the most effective approach would be to make this case public. The pattern of psychiatric retaliation against healthcare whistleblowers needs to be exposed, and your case has all the elements necessary to demonstrate how the system is being misused. That evening, as Dr. Harrison's deadline approached, Emma and Jake made the decision that would define the rest of their lives. Instead of waiting for Dr. Harrison to return with her ultimatum, they contacted journalists and medical ethics experts who specialized in healthcare fraud and psychiatric abuse. The story that emerged over the following weeks captured national attention in ways that neither Emma nor Jake had anticipated. Dr. Chen's evaluation became the centerpiece of a legal challenge that exposed not only Jake's wrongful competency determination but a broader pattern of psychiatric retaliation against healthcare whistleblowers throughout the industry. Dr. Harrison's attempt to have Jake recommitted was blocked by federal court injunction, and the criminal charges she had threatened were dismissed when prosecutors realized they would have to defend the prosecution of a competent physician whose only crime was exposing healthcare fraud. The media attention brought unexpected support from medical professionals who had faced similar retaliation, legal organizations that specialized in whistleblower protection, and patient advocacy groups who understood the importance of protecting healthcare workers who prioritized patient safety over institutional profits. More importantly, the publicity brought patients to their mountain clinic from throughout the region. People who had been struggling with inadequate medical care and were drawn by reports of physicians who would put patient welfare ahead of insurance company profits or administrative convenience. Within 6 months, Emma and Jake had expanded their clinic into a full-service medical center that served 3 mountain counties, staffed by healthcare professionals who had been attracted by the opportunity to practice medicine the way it was supposed to be practiced, focused entirely on patient care rather than profit margins. The Harrison Medical Group faced federal investigation for healthcare fraud, tax evasion, and misuse of psychiatric commitment procedures. Dr. Harrison herself was stripped of her medical license and faced criminal charges that would likely result in significant prison time. Jake's trust fund, which his mother had tried to use as leverage against him, became the foundation for a non-profit medical organization that provided free healthcare services to underserved rural communities throughout the Southeast. Emma's nursing license was not only reinstated, but she was invited to testify before Congress about healthcare fraud and the retaliation faced by medical professionals who exposed patient safety violations. Their marriage of convenience had evolved into a genuine partnership built on shared values and mutual respect. But more than that, it had become the foundation for a medical practice that demonstrated how healthcare could serve patients rather than shareholders. On a cold December evening, exactly 1 year after Emma had collapsed beside the mountain highway, she stood in the main examination room of their expanded clinic, watching Jake conduct a community health seminar for local families. The room was packed with people who had learned to trust their medical advice, parents who no longer had to choose between paying for healthcare and paying for groceries, elderly patients who could manage chronic conditions effectively because they had access to proper medications and regular monitoring. Ben Torres approached Emma during a break in the seminar, his back pain completely resolved, and his respect for both doctors evident in his expression. "Mrs. Harrison, I wanted you to know that what you and Dr. Jake did, fighting his family and all those lawyers, it means more to folks around here than you probably realize." Maria Santos nodded agreement from nearby, her blood pressure well controlled, and her face showing the health that came from proper medical care. "Before you came, people died from things that didn't need to kill them, just because we couldn't afford to drive to the city every time someone got sick." Emma looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the months, patients who had become friends, families who had learned to trust that their medical care would be based on their needs rather than their ability to pay. The legal battle with Dr. Harrison had been difficult and expensive, but it had also created something that neither she nor Jake could have achieved alone. Jake finished his presentation and joined Emma at the back of the room, his arms settling around her waist with the casual intimacy of 2 people who had learned to depend on each other through circumstances that would have destroyed most relationships. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the contentment of someone who had found his true calling. Emma thought about the woman who had collapsed beside the highway a year ago, desperate and homeless and convinced that her career in healthcare was over. She thought about the man who had offered her a marriage of convenience and the gradual revelation of his own struggles against a corrupt system that punished ethical practice. The only thing I regret, Emma said, watching their patients gather their children and prepare for the journey home through mountain darkness that no longer seemed threatening, is that it took us so long to realize that the best way to fight a corrupt system is to build something better to replace it. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but inside their clinic, Emma felt the warmth that came from finally understanding that sometimes the most important battles were won, not by defeating enemies but by proving that courage and integrity could create something worth protecting. Their mountain clinic had become more than a medical facility. It had become proof that healthcare could serve humanity rather than profit, that two people who refused to compromise their principles could build something that benefited entire communities, and that the most powerful response to corruption was the demonstration of what ethical practice could accomplish when it was allowed to flourish. Jake squeezed her hand as they watched their last patients disappear into the snowy night, both of them understanding that they had discovered something far more valuable than safety or financial security. They had found a way to practice medicine that honored both their professional skills and their personal values. And they had proved that love built on shared principles could overcome any obstacle that threatened to separate them. 5 years had passed since the federal investigation concluded with Dr. Patricia Harrison's conviction on multiple counts of healthcare fraud and criminal conspiracy. Emma stood in the boardroom of the Harrison Medical Foundation, reviewing quarterly reports that showed their network of rural clinics now served over 40,000 patients across 7 states. The irony was not lost on her that she was sitting in the same building where Jake's mother had once orchestrated systematic fraud, now transformed into the headquarters of an organization dedicated to providing ethical healthcare to underserved communities. The foundation had grown beyond anything Emma or Jake had envisioned during those desperate early days when they were fighting for their survival against seemingly impossible odds. What had started as a single mountain clinic, operated by 2 people running from their past, had evolved into a comprehensive healthcare network that employed over 300 medical professionals, all committed to the principle that patient care should never be subordinated to profit margins. Dr. Robert Harrison, Jake's younger brother, knocked on the boardroom door before entering with the cautious demeanor he had maintained during the 3 years since joining their organization. His transformation from compliant heir to genuine healthcare advocate had been gradual but authentic. Driven by his horror at discovering the true extent of his mother's criminal activities and his determination to atone for his years of willful blindness. Emma, the site visit reports from the Tennessee clinics are ready for your review, Robert said, setting a thick folder on the conference table. Dr. Martinez wants to discuss expanding the mobile clinic program to reach more isolated communities. Emma nodded, accepting the reports while noting the genuine enthusiasm in Robert's voice when he discussed patient services. His conversion to ethical healthcare practice had been tested repeatedly over the years, but he had proven himself through consistent dedication to their mission and his willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for organizational principles. How is the staff retention looking in the eastern region? Emma asked, scanning the summary statistics that showed patient satisfaction rates consistently above 90% across all their facilities. Better than projected. We're seeing less turnover among nurses and physicians than comparable organizations, probably because people want to work in environments where they can focus on patient care without administrative interference. Robert's assessment reflected one of the Foundation's core discoveries about healthcare employment. Medical professionals who were allowed to practice according to their training and ethical standards showed remarkable loyalty to organizations that supported their commitment to patient welfare over bureaucratic efficiency. The Foundation's employment model had become a subject of study among healthcare policy researchers, who were documenting how eliminating profit-driven administrative pressure improved both job satisfaction and patient outcomes. Emma had testified before congressional committees about their approach, but she remained most proud of the daily impact their clinics had on individual patients and communities. Jake entered the boardroom carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had just finished a challenging but successful procedure. His surgical skills had not diminished during his years in the mountains, and he now split his time between direct patient care and overseeing the Foundation's clinical protocols. Mrs. Patterson's surgery went perfectly, he announced, settling into the chair beside Emma with the comfortable intimacy of 2 people who had shared both professional and personal challenges for years. The gallbladder was more inflamed than the imaging suggested, but we were able to complete the procedure laparoscopically. She should be home by Thursday. Emma smiled at Jake's satisfaction with what other surgeons might consider a routine procedure. His years of fighting for the right to practice ethical medicine had given him a deep appreciation for the privilege of helping patients without external interference or artificial constraints on his clinical judgment. Dr. Chen called this morning, Emma said, referring to the forensic psychiatrist who had become both a close friend and a valuable ally in their ongoing work to protect healthcare whistleblowers. She's documenting 3 more cases of psychiatric retaliation against medical professionals who exposed fraud in their institutions. Jake's expression darkened with the anger that still surfaced whenever they encountered evidence of systemic abuse in healthcare administration. Same pattern as the others: competency challenges and commitment threats. Identical methodology. Dr. Chen thinks we're looking at coordinated strategy rather than isolated incidents. She wants to organize a conference on psychiatric abuse in healthcare settings, using our case as an anchor example. The conference Dr. Chen was proposing would bring together legal experts, medical professionals, and policy researchers to document and combat the systematic use of psychiatric commitment against healthcare whistleblowers. Emma and Jake had become reluctant experts on the subject, their experience providing a roadmap for other medical professionals facing similar retaliation. Robert looked up from the reports he was reviewing, his expression thoughtful. Would the Foundation be willing to sponsor the conference? We have the resources, and it aligns with our mission to protect ethical healthcare practice. Emma exchanged glances with Jake, both of them recognizing the symbolic significance of using Harrison Medical Foundation resources to combat the very type of abuse that had once been orchestrated from this building. The Foundation's board would need to approve the expenditure, but Emma was confident they would support any initiative that protected healthcare professionals from institutional retaliation. I think that's exactly the kind of project our board would want to fund, Emma said. Draft a proposal for the next meeting. The afternoon brought a steady stream of meetings with department heads, grant reviewers, and community health coordinators, all focused on expanding their services to reach more patients who lacked access to quality medical care. Emma found herself energized by the complexity of managing an organization that had grown far beyond what either she or Jake could have anticipated during their early days as partners in a single mountain clinic. Their marriage had evolved alongside their professional partnership, deepening through shared challenges and mutual respect into something that encompassed both romantic love and genuine friendship. They had discovered that couples who built their relationships around shared values and common purpose could withstand pressures that destroyed partnerships based purely on attraction or convenience. The Foundation's success had brought speaking invitations from medical schools, policy conferences, and professional organizations interested in their model of ethical healthcare delivery. Emma had initially been reluctant to accept public roles, but she had come to understand that their story provided hope for medical professionals who felt trapped by corrupt institutional practices. Jake had embraced public advocacy more readily, using his platform to expose ongoing fraud in healthcare systems and to support legislation that would protect patients from unnecessary procedures and inflated billing. His background as both perpetrator and victim of system abuse gave him unique credibility when testifying about the need for stronger oversight and whistleblower protection. As evening approached, Emma and Jake walked together through the Foundation's research wing, where
Teams of epidemiologists and health policy analysts were documenting the impact of their clinical model on patient outcomes and community health indicators. The data consistently showed that patients treated in their clinics experienced better health outcomes, higher satisfaction rates, and lower costs compared to traditional fee-for-service medical practices. Dr. Sarah Williams, their chief research officer, met them in the main laboratory where she was analyzing patient data that would be presented at the upcoming American Medical Association conference. Her research had become crucial evidence in policy debates about healthcare reform and the potential for nonprofit medical organizations to address healthcare access problems in rural America. The longitudinal study results are remarkable, Dr. Williams said, displaying charts that showed sustained improvement in chronic disease management among their patient population. We're seeing diabetes control rates 30% better than national averages, hypertension management that exceeds urban specialty clinic results, and preventive care utilization that's higher than anything documented in comparable rural populations. Emma studied the data with the satisfaction of someone whose nursing background had taught her to measure success through patient outcomes rather than financial metrics. The Foundation's model proved that ethical healthcare practice was not only morally superior to profit-driven medicine but actually more effective at achieving the health outcomes that medical professionals were trained to pursue. What about the cost analysis? Jake asked, reviewing charts that showed the Foundation's per-patient expenses compared to traditional healthcare delivery models. Lower costs across all categories, except physician time per patient. Dr. Williams reported. We spend more time with each patient, but we eliminate most administrative overhead and avoid unnecessary procedures, which more than compensates for the increased labor costs. The economic data supported arguments Emma and Jake had been making in policy forums about the false economy of healthcare systems that prioritized efficiency over effectiveness. By eliminating profit margins and administrative bureaucracy, their foundation could provide more comprehensive care at lower cost while paying their staff competitive salaries and maintaining high-quality facilities. As they walked back to their offices, Emma reflected on the transformation their lives had undergone since that desperate evening when she collapsed beside a mountain highway. The homeless nurse and the mountain man who had found each other through necessity had discovered that their partnership could serve purposes far beyond their individual survival. The Foundation now employed former colleagues from both their previous careers, medical professionals who had been attracted by the opportunity to practice healthcare the way they had been trained to practice it, focused entirely on patient welfare rather than institutional profits or administrative convenience. Emma's former supervisor from Cedar Falls Hospital had joined their nursing staff after witnessing the Foundation's patient care standards during a site visit. Jake's medical school classmates had initially been skeptical of his decision to abandon traditional practice for rural healthcare advocacy, but several had eventually joined the Foundation after experiencing the satisfaction of treating patients without insurance company interference or administrative pressure to maximize billing. Their personal relationship had been tested by the stresses of building and managing a large organization, but they had discovered that shared purpose could sustain romantic partnership through challenges that destroyed relationships built on less substantial foundations. They had learned to support each other's professional growth while maintaining the mutual respect that had characterized their partnership from the beginning. Emma's nursing practice had expanded to include teaching and mentorship responsibilities that utilized skills she had never developed during her hospital career. She now supervised nurse practitioners and physician assistants who provided primary care services throughout their clinic network, and she had established training programs that attracted medical professionals from across the country. Jake's surgical practice had become a model for ethical specialty care in rural settings, demonstrating that complex procedures could be performed safely and effectively in smaller facilities when proper protocols were followed and patient welfare was prioritized over scheduling efficiency. His operating room procedures had been documented in medical journals as examples of how surgical care could be delivered in underserved communities without compromising quality or safety. The evening found them in their private office, reviewing grant applications from other nonprofit organizations that wanted to replicate their healthcare model in different regions. The Foundation had become a resource for community health advocates who were struggling to establish ethical medical practices in areas dominated by profit-driven healthcare systems. The application from Montana looks promising, Jake said, studying a proposal from a group of physicians who wanted to establish rural clinics based on the Foundation's model. They have community support and adequate funding, and their clinical team has the right combination of skills and commitment. Emma reviewed the application materials,
noting the detailed budget projections and patient population analysis that demonstrated serious planning and realistic expectations. I think we should approve their request for technical assistance and consider them for seed funding if their feasibility study shows strong community support. The grant program had become one of the Foundation's most successful initiatives, enabling them to expand their impact beyond direct patient services by supporting similar organizations in other states. Emma and Jake had learned that their model could be adapted to different communities and populations while maintaining the core principles that made it effective. Their success had attracted attention from healthcare policy researchers who were studying alternatives to traditional medical practice models. Emma had been invited to serve on government advisory committees examining rural healthcare access, while Jake participated in medical education reform initiatives that sought to better prepare physicians for ethical practice in challenging environments. The Foundation's board meetings had become forums for discussing healthcare policy at national and international levels, with board members who included former government officials, medical school deans, and community health advocates. Emma and Jake had maintained control over clinical decisions and organizational culture, but they had welcomed outside expertise in areas like finance, legal compliance, and strategic planning. As they prepared to leave the office, Emma looked out at the parking lot filled with vehicles belonging to staff members who had chosen to work for an organization that prioritized patient care over profit margins. Many of them had taken salary reductions to join the Foundation, but exit interviews consistently showed higher job satisfaction than they had experienced in traditional healthcare settings. "Any regrets about the path we chose?" Jake asked, echoing the question they had discussed periodically over the years as their responsibilities and public visibility had increased. Emma thought about the homeless woman who had collapsed in the mountains 5 years earlier, desperate and convinced that her healthcare career was over. She thought about the mountain man who had offered a marriage of convenience to a stranger, hoping to find a way to practice medicine while avoiding his family's retaliation. "The only regret I have," Emma said, turning off the office lights and walking with Jake toward the elevator that would take them to the parking garage, "is that it took us so long to understand that the most effective way to fight corruption is to demonstrate what ethical practice can accomplish when it's allowed to flourish." Outside, the evening air carried the scent of approaching autumn, reminding Emma of the seasons that had marked their journey from desperate individuals to partners in an organization that served tens of thousands of patients. The Foundation's success had exceeded their most optimistic projections, but more importantly, it had proved that healthcare could serve humanity rather than profit when medical professionals were allowed to practice according to their training and ethical commitments. Their mountain clinic still operated as part of the Foundation's network, serving the community that had first welcomed them when they had nowhere else to turn. Emma and Jake returned there regularly, both for personal renewal and to remind themselves of the principles that had guided their transformation from refugees from corrupt healthcare systems to leaders of an organization that demonstrated ethical practice was both morally necessary and practically effective. The Foundation's impact would continue growing through the professionals it trained, the organizations it supported, and the policy changes it influenced. But Emma knew that their most important legacy would be the proof they had provided that courage and integrity could overcome institutional corruption when people were willing to risk everything for principles they believed in. As they drove through the city toward their home, Emma felt the satisfaction that came from understanding that their partnership had created something larger than either of them could have achieved alone, something that would continue serving patients and protecting ethical healthcare professionals long after they were gone. The Foundation's 10th anniversary celebration took place on a crisp October morning in the same mountain valley where Emma and Jake had first established their clinic. Hundreds of former patients, staff members, and community leaders gathered to commemorate not just the organization's growth but the transformation it had brought to healthcare delivery across rural America. Emma stood at the podium that had been erected near the original clinic building, now expanded into a comprehensive medical center that served as the Foundation's flagship facility. She looked out at faces that told the story of their decade-long journey from desperate individuals to leaders of a movement that had fundamentally changed how healthcare could be delivered to underserved populations. Maria Santos sat in the front row, her blood pressure well controlled at 82 years old, and her face radiating the health that came from consistent quality medical care. Ben Torres stood nearby with his grandson, a teenager who had never known a world where medical treatment was inaccessible to mountain families. These were the faces that reminded Emma why their struggle against corruption had been worth every risk they had taken. Dr. Amanda Chen had traveled from across the country to speak at the celebration, her forensic psychiatry practice now focused entirely on protecting healthcare whistleblowers from institutional retaliation. The Conference on Psychiatric Abuse in Healthcare Settings had evolved into an annual gathering that drew policymakers and medical professionals from around the world, all working to combat the systematic silencing of ethical healthcare advocates. 10 years ago, Emma began, her voice carrying across the valley where her journey had begun. A homeless nurse and a mountain man made a desperate bargain to help each other survive. Neither of us imagined that our partnership would become the foundation for an organization that now serves over 100,000 patients annually. The audience included representatives from the 43 rural clinics that now operated under the Foundation's model, medical professionals who had been trained in their residency programs, and policy researchers who were documenting the impact of nonprofit healthcare delivery on community health outcomes. Jake joined Emma at the podium, his presence still capable of providing the emotional support that had sustained their partnership through every challenge they had faced. His surgical practice had evolved to include training programs that attracted residents from across the country, physicians who wanted to learn how to deliver specialty care in resource-limited settings without compromising quality or safety. The Foundation's success belongs to every person who chose patient care over profit margins, Jake said, acknowledging the staff members who had sacrificed higher salaries to work for an organization that prioritized ethical practice. But more importantly, it belongs to the patients who trusted us to provide care that served their needs rather than institutional convenience. Robert Harrison stepped forward to present the Foundation's annual report, a document that chronicled not just financial performance but patient outcomes, community health improvements, and the broader impact on healthcare policy reform. His transformation from compliant heir to genuine healthcare advocate remained one of the most remarkable personal journeys within the organization's history. This year, our clinics achieved the highest patient satisfaction scores ever documented in rural healthcare delivery, Robert announced. We've also trained over 200 medical professionals who have established similar practices in their own communities, extending our impact far beyond direct patient services. Emma listened to the statistics with the satisfaction of someone whose nursing background had taught her to measure success through patient outcomes rather than financial metrics. The Foundation had proven that ethical healthcare practice was not only morally superior, but more effective at achieving the health outcomes that medical professionals were trained to pursue. Dr. Chen took the podium to discuss the broader implications of their model for healthcare reform. Her research had documented how the Foundation's approach eliminated most sources of medical error and patient dissatisfaction while reducing costs and improving clinical outcomes across all demographic categories. The Harrison Medical Foundation has demonstrated that healthcare can serve humanity when medical professionals are freed from institutional pressures that subordinate patient welfare to profit maximization, Dr. Chen said. Their success provides a roadmap for transforming healthcare delivery throughout rural America. The celebration continued with tours of the expanded facilities, presentations by department heads, and testimonials from patients whose lives had been transformed by access to ethical healthcare. Emma found herself moving through crowds of people whose stories illustrated the human impact of their decade-long effort to prove that medicine could be practiced according to the principles that had originally drawn them to healthcare careers. Dr. Sarah Williams presented research findings that showed sustained improvement in chronic disease management, preventive care utilization, and health equity measures across all populations served by Foundation clinics. The longitudinal data provided compelling evidence that their model could address healthcare access problems while delivering superior patient outcomes. As evening approached, Emma and Jake walked together through the medical center that had grown from their original two-person clinic into a comprehensive healthcare facility that employed over 50 medical professionals. The laboratories, surgical suites, and specialized care units all operated according to protocols that prioritized patient welfare over administrative efficiency or profit maximization. The research wing housed teams of epidemiologists and health policy analysts, whose work had influenced healthcare legislation at state and federal levels. Their documentation of improved outcomes and reduced costs under nonprofit healthcare delivery had become crucial evidence in policy debates about healthcare reform and the potential for community-based medical organizations to address access problems in underserved areas. Emma's role had evolved from direct patient care to organizational leadership and policy advocacy. But she maintained regular clinical responsibilities that kept her connected to the nursing practice that had shaped her commitment to ethical healthcare. She supervised nurse practitioner programs that trained medical professionals to deliver primary care in resource-limited settings while maintaining quality standards that exceeded urban specialty clinics. Jake's surgical practice had become a training ground for physicians who wanted to learn how to deliver complex care in rural settings without compromising safety or effectiveness. His operating room protocols had been documented in medical literature as examples of how specialty care could be provided in smaller facilities when proper procedures were followed and patient welfare was prioritized over scheduling convenience. Their marriage had deepened through shared challenges and mutual support into a partnership that encompassed both romantic love and professional collaboration. They had discovered that relationships built around shared values and common purpose could sustain both personal and professional growth through pressures that destroyed partnerships based on attraction or convenience alone. The Foundation's board had evolved to include healthcare policy experts, community health advocates, and former government officials who provided strategic guidance while respecting the clinical autonomy that made their model effective. Emma and Jake maintained control over medical decision-making and organizational culture, but they had welcomed outside expertise in areas that supported their mission without compromising their principles. As they prepared to leave the anniversary celebration, Emma reflected on the transformation their lives had undergone since that desperate evening when she collapsed beside a mountain highway. The homeless nurse and the mountain man who had found each other through necessity had discovered that their partnership could serve purposes far beyond individual survival or even organizational success. The Foundation had become a demonstration project that proved healthcare could serve humanity when medical professionals were allowed to practice according to their training and ethical commitments. Their success had inspired similar organizations across the country and influenced policy changes that protected healthcare whistleblowers from institutional retaliation. Most importantly, they had created a model that would continue serving patients and protecting ethical healthcare professionals long after their direct involvement ended. The medical professionals they had trained, the organizations they had supported, and the policy changes they had influenced would extend their impact far beyond what either of them could have achieved individually. Any final thoughts about the journey we've taken? Jake asked as they walked toward their car, the celebration continuing behind them with the sounds of people who understood they were part of something larger than individual careers or personal success. Emma looked back at the medical center where lights were beginning to come on in examination rooms and patient care areas. Knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of providing healthcare that served patient needs rather than institutional profits. The building represented more than organizational success or personal achievement. It represented proof that courage and integrity could overcome institutional corruption when people were willing to risk everything for principles they believed in. I think we proved that two people who refuse to compromise their principles can change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they serve. Emma said, and maybe that's the most important legacy we could leave. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.